Hello, everybody, and a very, very warm welcome to my YouTube channel here called Wine with Jimmy. Delighted to have you on board. We are a wine educational channel that really helps those of you studying for your wine examinations, gives you lots of content, lots of information to give you the confidence to smash your examinations out of the park. So we're going to look at here the wines of the world for the WSET Diploma. That's a level 4. And this is on Bordeaux, the big mammoth undertaking that is this section. So this is series 1 of 9 series. There you are. So it's a rather long, epic book. This is like War and Peace. And we're going to go into series 1, which is the overview, and that includes grape varieties. And here we are. There are 8 sections within this first series. So please do follow along. And if you have any comments, questions, or concerns, you can get in touch. And the best way actually is by commenting on this video below in the world of YouTube. Whilst you're down there, there are a couple of buttons you can click. You can click subscribe to get weekly updates from us, and you can click like, and that like helps us just a little bit. Now, this part and part 2, which is on the climate, will be available as free content here on the world of YouTube. But parts 3 through to 8 will only be available on my e-learning portal. That's at www.winewithjimmy.com. It's ad-free and has lots of lovely extras to help you study and revise just a little bit better for your examinations. If you want to get in contact also by social media, you will see at the bottom of every slide are all the handles that one can use. So let's rock and roll with the world of Bordeaux, the famous region located in the southwest of France on the 45th parallel. So this is a mightily important place, which is often at really the forefront of most collectors' wine cellars, but also really just for knowledge as well. It's a very well-known area. So let's have a look at the region itself. Here is a map. It's quite a complex map because Bordeaux is the largest AOC region in the whole of France. So therefore, it really has lots of little different parts. And that's why we've got 9 whole series on the wines of Bordeaux. So we're in southwest France. We're close to the Atlantic Ocean. That is what we see on the left-hand side, on the western side of our map. The area under vine here is enormous. We are talking around 110,000 hectares. So that's a huge amount. Now, if you have looked at some other data and so on, you may see and hear sort of around 120,000 is often quite cited. But the latest figures from the CIVB is 111,000 hectares in total. The great majority of wine produced here, though, is actually kind of generic wine, we would call. It's the modest Bordeaux or Bordeaux Supérieur appellations, which tend to be really low price, inexpensive to mid-priced at best. That's the real bulk production, and there's a lot of it that comes from Bordeaux. Around 70% of all bottled wine are inexpensive mid-price, and about 30% are premium or super premium within Bordeaux. By contrast, a prestigious appellation, so if we take one of the famous names, Pomerol, named after a village on the right bank, occupies only 800 hectares. That's 800 out of course, 111,000. So, of course, these prestigious appellations are very highly sought after, and there's very limited availability of them as well. Let's get a few geographical features in place for Bordeaux. I'm going to show you where we have our major rivers in the region. So here you go. So the rivers here, we have the region being traversed really by this river that comes in from the south. It's very important in southwest France around Gascony. This is the river Garonne that comes from the Pyrenees. So this heads its way up north, as you can see here, through Bordeaux city and to the Gironde. And then from the east comes the Dordogne River. And that meanders its way past Bergerac, past all this right bank area, as we can see here, like the city of Libourne. And then it meets the Garonne. And that confluence is where it creates the big, famous shipping estuary of the Gironde, as you can see here, that big, expansive blue part there. Now, you'll see that if we kind of talk backwards from that now, you'll see that that kind of forms like I call it a fork of lightning. You'll see that it kind of goes through this region and it separates the region into 3 areas. Now, of course, your diploma candidates, you know all these things, but we do need to just mention them again. So the left-hand side of all of the rivers and the fork of lightning is where we have that kind of purpley area and orange area. This is where Bordeaux city lies. And this, of course, is the left bank. Then on the right-hand side, which is where we have Libourne, and it's right of all the rivers, is the right bank. And in the central area, we have somewhere called Entre deux mers, which means between 2 seas. It's not just one of those wild French exaggerations. This means between 2 seas because these 2 rivers, the Garonne and Dordogne, are actually tidal influenced up to 75 kilometers inland. So, of course, they act like to the sea. So that's why we call these between 2 seas, this greenish area in the middle of the zone. Okay, so grape varieties of this area. So as you can see from the pie charts, we have two pie charts. We have on the left-hand side red production, and on the green, the right-hand side, we have the white wine production in green. 90% of production in Bordeaux is for black grape varieties. And the production of AOC wine is split into 85% red, 10% dry white, 1% sweet, and then 4% pink wine production, rosé. Okay, and this is your major grape varieties as per category. So out of the black grapes that are cultivated, Merlot accounts for 2/3, Cabernet Sauvignon accounts for about 22%, Cabernet Franc at 10%, others like Malbec and Carmenère fall in at 2%. In your white grape production, Semillon and Sauvignon are about equal parts. Then we have Muscadel at about 5%. Other varieties such as Colombard, Uni Blanc fall in at 7% total production. So that's just really the setting. I now want to get into a lovely, wonderful bit of history to really give you that historical, cultural importance behind the region of Bordeaux. So here we go. So we're going to go really quite far back. So we're going to go far back really to the Celtic origins of this area, and then going into the Roman times, of course. So first of all, we had a tribe here called the Biterges tribe, who settled here prior to the occupation of Rome, later to be known as the Aquitania tribe as well. Now, these the Romans came through here around the 1st century BC, and just like in Champagne, Bordeaux was very highly prized for its chalk, for, of course, its quarryable capabilities, therefore able to then, of course, create structures out of and roads and so on. So you find chalk production being importantly found down here, but Bordeaux's real principal focus was things like tin and lead for the Roman Empire. Now, the wines of Bordeaux gained in popularity. They became important in very famous courts, and even things like scholars and poets started to really focus on them as well. A Bordeaux native who was quite famous during the Roman Empire, towards the latter Western Roman Empire, is who I have upon the screen. This is Ausonius. And he, of course, was a huge ambassador for the production of wines within this area. And of course, a venerable chateau is today named after this poet. In Saint-Emilion, you have Chateau Ausone, named after Ausonius. So after the collapse of the Western Roman Empire at the end of the 5th century, we really have a landscape in Western Europe which becomes a little bit unstable. After many centuries of stability under the Roman Empire, here comes instability, and many of the factions which were oppressed by the Western Roman Empire started to, of course, take back lands they believed were theirs. And of course, these were called, under Roman words, they were called barbarians. But of course, by this point, were rather civilized. So we had really Bordeaux being invaded and sacked by successive waves of Vandals, of Visigoths, who had quite an extensive kingdom from Toulouse to Toledo across most of the Iberian Peninsula, and of course the Franks, who were mightily important from Clovis through to Charlemagne. The city actually faded into relative obscurity during what we would call the Dark Ages. I suppose some would call it the Dark Ages. In the late 7th century, the region was invaded by the Moors. The Moors quickly actually sort of retreated behind the Pyrenees in the end. They did actually make it as far north as the Loire Valley, but they were very thinly spread at this point and retreated behind the Pyrenees. And eventually, Bordeaux was re-established by the Dukes of Gascony. And of course, Gascony is the region found down in the southwest, where today we find the likes of Armagnac, for example, and some wonderful wines too. Following on from that, in 1152, we have the Duchess Eleanor of Aquitaine marrying Henri Plantagenet, Count of Anjou, and of course, King of England. Why is this of any importance? Well, this King Henry II, who was the Duke of Normandy, Count of Anjou, under this marriage gained land in France. About a third of France became under English control due to this marriage, including places in the north like Flanders, Brittany, La Rochelle in the west, the southwest, and of course here, Aquitaine, Bordeaux in the southwest as well. So for 301 years, England rules these lands. And this is important because it means that Bordeaux has access to not only their French market, but now an English market at a very strategically located place. It's right on the Gironde estuary, and enabling it really to trade rather well. And of course, what we have on the back of this is really a strong maritime connection, strong trade, and the first golden age of Bordeaux. So England during this time was staunchly Catholic. This is very much pre-King Henry VIII. So we find that wine was required for mass, and this red wine from Bordeaux became very important. It in fact kind of became England's vineyard. So we have a wealthy merchant class and nobility being established off the back of this, Bordeaux becoming rather prosperous. The peninsula of Medoc at this point, by the way, was not under vine. It was actually marshland, rocky marshland, and sweet wine production didn't begin to the Middle Ages. So we're talking about red at this time. We must talk about really the collapse of the English dominance here, and that is the Battle of Castillon. So this happens in 1453. So this is 301 years after Eleanor of Aquitaine marries Henri Plantagenet. And this is a location in Bordeaux. Castillon is located on the plateau to the east of Saint-Emilion. And with this battle, it really spelled the end of the English dominance in France and France gaining its lands back. Very important date indeed. The picture here is depicting John Talbot, the Earl of Shrewsbury, who was the leader of the English forces at that infamous day where the English lost. And of course, important in Bordeaux terms, because the etymology of Chateau Talbot is said to take its name from the commander of these forces. So this is the Battle of Castillon. Then we have, of course, some other influences to the area. So we really know that there's a big French influence here because of the location. Then we had 300 years of English influence. Then we have, in partnership with the French, the Dutch influence in this area. Now, the Dutch were huge shippers and traders with big mercantile fleets, and they became very involved in many parts of Western France, including the Loire Valley and also down here in Bordeaux. And this is really at the close of the 100 Years' War. The Dutch wanted white wine to be able to distill into their eau de vie for blending into their wines for their brandy wine, their burnt wine, which would enable safe passage on ships. So the Dutch started to really change water management techniques. Think about Holland, think about the Netherlands, real great at water management. And of course, they really sort of implemented that here. One of the first things they did was draining the Medoc with a system of canals and really draining it to reveal all of these rocky gravels. Then they planted vines here. So really, we have the Dutch to thank for the Medoc vineyards. So things like Margaux, Pauillac, Saint-Estèphe, and Saint-Julien. So big influence, of course, from the Dutch. And off the back of this, and off the back of the expanse of the French Empire, we have the Second Golden Age. So we, of course, have wines of Bordeaux going into places like Holland and all surrounding areas there. England, France, they're big empires across the world. So we see a really big push here for Bordeaux wines at this time. Aubryon is built on the outskirts of Bordeaux city. And of course, today, this luxury chateau, this romantic and majestic architectural feat is very important as one of the first growths. But many chateaux are built at this time by the wealth and the nobility of the Bordeaux inhabitants. We then have, of course, the revolutionist times within France, and this is at the end of the 18th century. The church, though, was not strong in Bordeaux. The church was much stronger closer to the Papal States, so eastern and southeastern France, much stronger. So in places like Alsace and places like Burgundy and places like the southeast, the church was strong. Here, the nobility was strong. So most wine estates were privately held. So the populace under the revolution attacked the merchants and especially the foreign merchants. And trading countries avoided the port at this time. And Bordeaux wine trade all but stopped at that time. So we come into more more modernish times, and in 1855, I know this is still 170 years ago, we have an important date in Bordeaux's calendar, and it's an important date in the French calendar. This is the Exposition Universelle de Paris, which is the big Paris fair, showing off really a whole range of French-influenced products from its country and its empire. And included within that really was wine. The Bordeaux Chamber of Commerce asked the region's brokers, mainly up in Paris, to compile a classification of the wines. This was based on price, and the estates of the Medoc plus Aubryon, which is based, of course, in the Grave area, were classed into 5 bands. And of course, These are things like the first, the second, the third, the fourth, and the fifth growth. Sauternes were classed into 3 bands. Now, classifications in Bordeaux at this point weren't new. We had Thomas Jefferson creating an unofficial list before this date. But these were the formal assessments set in stone for this big Paris wine fair. And they remain very much intact today with little modifications. I will go through the classifications in a later series on this run. And they still influence prices today in the region of Bordeaux. So it's crazy, of course. So let's wrap it up there for the history. Now, that I'm not going to go into the history going into late 19th century, 20th century, because it follows pretty much most of the rest of France with phylloxera. The real seat of fight against phylloxera here is in Bordeaux. But then, of course, the First World War, Second World War, and then into modern times. We will class really recent times in the wine business section that we talk about a little bit later. But there we are. It's a rather long video, this one, on the first of many series in Bordeaux. But I do hope you've enjoyed this look as an introduction and history of this exceptionally famous region. As always, if you have any comments, any questions, any concerns, please do get in touch. You could do so by commenting on this video below. Make sure you click like and subscribe. Social media is found at the bottom of every slide. And if you find yourself in Old Blighty, that's England, and if you find yourself in London, the capital town, please do come and see me. Come and see me for a class, a glass, or a bottle. I've been Jimmy Smith. Ciao.